As the last light of day bleeds away into the horizon, a deep silence settles over a seemingly endless desert highway. This road cuts through the heart of an arid wasteland, a place untouched by the usual marks of civilization. No billboards, no roadside diners, just the unyielding expanse of sand and scrub. Tonight, the atmosphere is thick with the electric charge of a storm that has just passed, leaving the air crisp and the sky a haunting canvas of swirling dust colors. This highway, rarely traveled and spoken of only in hushed tones by the locals, has an unsettling reputation. They say it's like no other place on Earth, where the very fabric of reality seems thinner, more fragile. Whispers float on the wind, tales of travelers who set out with confidence under the blazing sun, only to vanish without a trace by moonlight. They speak of cars found abandoned, doors ajar, radios still crackling with static, as if reaching out for a final, desperate connection. Tonight, a new set of travelers will find themselves on this ancient asphalt. They come from different walks of life, each carrying their own reasons for journeying through this desolate landscape. A family returning from a joyful vacation, a truck driver with deadlines echoing in his mind, a couple seeking adventure, and a lone biker trying to outrun his past. Unbeknownst to them, their paths are about to converge, tied together by a thread of fate woven through the very road they travel. As the twilight deepens, the highway seems to pulse with a life of its own, a sinister whisper that speaks of old, unresolved tragedies, and restless spirits not of the dead, but of the land itself. The travelers press on, drawn deeper into the desert's embrace, unaware that with each passing mile, they move closer not just to their destinations, but to the heart of their own personal nightmares. Tonight, the desert is alive, and it is hungry. The highway stretches before them, a narrow ribbon of asphalt that slices through the desert's heart. Endless miles unspool under the vast open sky, a monochrome landscape of tawny sands and sparse vegetation that barely rustles in the hot, still air. Here, the trappings of civilization have been left far behind. No service stations mar the purity of the horizon, no power lines frame the view. Instead, there's only the raw, untouched wilderness, echoing a time before maps claimed this territory. The silence here is profound, almost physical in its intensity. It presses in on the ears, a reminder of the isolation this road promises. Travelers find their voices lowering instinctively, their conversations tapering off into uneasy glances. The highway offers no comfort, no camaraderie. It is a place out of sync with the bustling noise of populated areas. This is a stretch of the world that feels older, wiser, and indomitable, indifferent to the tiny, fleeting cars that dare its length. As the sun sets, the shadows grow longer, and the desert seems to hold its breath, waiting. In this eerie expanse, the desert transcends its role as mere backdrop to the unfolding human dramas. It assumes a character of its own, a sentient, brooding presence that watches over the highway with a predatory gaze. The landscape appears static, yet those who dare traverse its domain feel the subtle, unnerving sensation of being observed, evaluated by an ancient and unknowable force. This highway is the desert's vein, through which it senses the fears and secrets of those who pass. As if conscious, the desert reacts subtly. The wind shifts course as if redirecting travelers' paths, the temperature fluctuates inexplicably, and even the sun's rays seem to cast more ominous shadows here than anywhere else. Whispered legends among the locals speak of the desert's will, suggesting it harbors intentions and desires, weaving a tapestry of fate with threads of sand and time. This notion that the desert itself might possess a mind, a sinister agenda all its own, colors every event that occurs along this remote highway. It's as if the land has motives, drawing in the unwary, offering them up to their own darkest fears and deepest regrets. The desert, timeless and impassive, holds secrets not meant for human minds, playing a long, patient game that spans generations and swallows histories. Within the sweeping solitude of the desert highway, a diverse ensemble of characters embarks on their respective journeys, each bringing their unique backgrounds and motivations to the fore as they navigate this uncanny route. The Keller family. Jim and Maria Keller, with their 2 children, Lucy and Tom, are homeward bound after a sun-soaked vacation at a serene coastal town. Jim, a middle school teacher, wears his responsibility like a second skin, constantly checking his rearview mirror for signs of trouble. Maria, a nurse, tries to keep the atmosphere light, engaging the kids with road trip games and stories. Lucy, curious and imaginative, peers out the window, lost in fantasies about the desert, while Tom, a practical young boy with a fondness for gadgets, tracks their route on his digital map, unaware of the impending deviations. Chuck Reynolds. A seasoned truck driver, Chuck hauls a load of undisclosed, carefully sealed crates that rattle ominously in the back of his rig. His gruff exterior masks a sharply intuitive mind, attuned to the subtle shifts in the landscape and the weight of solitude. Chuck is no stranger to long, lonely nights on the road, but this trip feels different, as if each mile is pulling him deeper into an unwritten story. Elena and Marco. Young, adventurous, and in love, this couple decided on a spontaneous road trip to explore the vast wilderness. Elena, a budding photographer, is eager to capture the haunting beauty of the desert at dusk. Marco, a writer, sees potential stories in the eerie calm of the landscape. Together, they drive with the windows down, the wind tangling Elena's hair, both laughing, yet unaware of the chilling encounters that await. Derek Sanders. Riding a rugged motorcycle, Derek is a lone figure against the vast backdrop of the desert. His journey is one of escape, a desperate attempt to outpace his troubled past, marked by a series of poor choices and broken relationships. With only a backpack and his thoughts, Derek's route is one of introspection, but the highway has other plans for him, as it subtly probes at the edges of his deepest fears. These characters, each encapsulated in their mobile bubbles, are initially oblivious to the interconnected web of destiny that the desert highway weaves around them. Their stories, though disparate, are bound by the common thread of this mysterious and treacherous road that tests the limits of their understanding and courage. As each group navigates the haunting stretch of desert highway, peculiar occurrences begin to unsettle the air of normalcy, hinting at the uncanny essence of their journey. The Keller family. The desert sun dips lower, casting long shadows, and the Kellers notice odd distortions on the horizon. What initially appears as a serene lake flickering in the distance turns into hot, wavering air as they approach. The mirage confuses little Lucy, who insists she sees figures dancing over the water. As Jim focuses on the road, the car's radio suddenly crackles to life, emitting a low, unintelligible whisper among the static, causing Maria to shiver and turn the dial off hastily. Chuck Reynolds. Alone in his cab, Chuck's trusty radio, usually his only companion through the solitary nights, begins to falter. Between the tunes of an old country song, a static-laced voice murmurs something indiscernible. Chuck shakes his head, attributing it to a long day's fatigue. However, his route unexpectedly diverts as his GPS inexplicably recalculates, directing him down an unmarked dirt road that wasn't on his map before, forcing him to double back after several confusing minutes. Elena and Marco. As they drive, eagerly discussing potential spots for Elena to photograph the sunset, their GPS suddenly shows a detour ahead, a road that supposedly cuts straight through the desert heart. Curiosity piqued, Marco turns the steering wheel, following the new route. Meanwhile, Elena's camera begins to malfunction, displaying images of blurry shapes that resemble human forms, even though she's certain she's only been photographing the landscape. Derek Sanders. Derek's journey is interrupted by the eerie echo of another motorcycle engine. It seems to come from right beside him, yet each time he looks, there is nothing but the open road and the whispering wind. The sound grows louder, then fades, playing a ghostly game of cat and mouse. His radio, set to a rock station, suddenly shifts frequencies, whispering disjointed phrases that seem almost like a warning, before returning to normal as if nothing had happened. These early signs of strangeness serve to unsettle the travelers, weaving the initial threads of dread and confusion into their minds, as the desert begins to tighten its grip on their realities. As the travelers press deeper into the heart of the desert, the unsettling events escalate, each incident more disturbing than the last, tailored to evoke personal fears and past traumas. The Keller family. The Kellers' ordeal intensifies when their vehicle inexplicably loses all power, coasting to a stop under the looming darkness. While Jim attempts to revive the engine, the children scream, pointing towards the windows where they see the silhouettes of people standing just beyond the reach of the headlights, vanishing whenever Jim looks their way. The family hears soft tapping coming from all sides of the car, as if dozens of fingers are testing the solidity of their temporary sanctuary. Chuck Reynolds. As Chuck maneuvers his truck through the increasingly unfamiliar terrain, he begins to notice discrepancies in the weight and balance of his cargo. When he pulls over to inspect, he finds that the seals on some crates appear tampered with. Derek Sanders. Derek's encounters grow more physical. He feels a chilling grip on his shoulder, turning to see no one there. His motorcycle begins to respond sluggishly, as if resisting his control. At his next stop, he finds disturbing carvings on a nearby rock symbols that match a tattoo he got in his youth, associated with a dark period in his life. Later, he swears he sees his own figure standing by the roadside, watching him ride away. These incidents not only heighten the sense of dread, but also begin to erode the traveler's grasp on reality. The desert seems to play on their deepest insecurities, drawing each person into a personal nightmare from which there appears no escape. The boundary between the real and the surreal blurs, leaving them isolated in their fear, yet inexorably linked by the road they share. As the night deepens on the desolate highway, the psychological landscape of each traveler begins to morph, drawing forth the hidden fears that lurk within their minds. Each experience is uniquely horrifying, shaped to challenge their very sense of self and reality. The Keller family. The horrors for the Kellers become intensely personal when they start to hear the children's whispered conversations in the backseat, not with each other, but with voices that respond with intimate knowledge of the family's secrets and fears. Maria hears her late mother's voice scolding her, while Jim confronts an invisible presence that accuses him of past failures. The children, petrified, claim to see their deceased grandfather sitting quietly among them, his eyes sorrowful and knowing. Chuck Reynolds. Alone in his truck, Chuck's isolation feeds into his deepest fear, being forgotten or left behind. The voices over the radio morph into a single, clear voice. That of his estranged brother, with whom he had a falling out years ago. The voice taunts him, blending real memories with twisted lies, making Chuck question his recollections and the very nature of his reality. Shadows seem to cling closer to the truck, manifesting briefly as people from his past who vanished from his life without closure. Elena and Marco. For Elena, the terror manifests through her camera's lens. She captures images of herself from different, impossible angles, as if an unseen observer is chronicling their ordeal. Marco's horror is auditory. He hears the scratching pen of his deceased mentor, who always critiqued his writing harshly, now narrating Marco's actions in a condemning tone. These personal horrors not only frighten, but also seed doubts about their perceptions and sanity. Derek Sanders. Derek faces the embodiment of his own self-loathing and regret. At each stop, he encounters increasingly disturbing reflections of himself, each one more disheveled and accusatory than the last. These apparitions confront Derek with harsh truths about his past choices and their impacts on others, manifesting physically as painful, grip-like sensations on his body, leaving marks that cannot be ignored. These manifestations not only intensify the fear each character feels, but also force them to confront parts of themselves they would rather leave hidden. The desert, acting almost as a merciless mirror, reflects their deepest anxieties and regrets, intertwining their personal horrors with the eerie, inexplicable events on the highway. As dawn approaches, veiled in a mist that seems to rise from the very ground itself, an unforeseen landmark emerges on the horizon for each group of travelers: a dilapidated roadside diner. Its appearance is anachronistic, a relic from a bygone era, with neon lights flickering sporadically, spelling out "Last Stop Diner" in a desperate, sputtering attempt at welcome. The building, with its peeling paint and boarded-up windows, stands starkly against the barren landscape, an impossible anomaly that none of the travelers recall ever seeing on any map. The Keller family, weary and unnerved, pull into the gravel lot first, their headlights illuminating the diner's faded sign. They are soon joined by Chuck, his truck rumbling into a stop beside them, the sound unusually loud in the oppressive silence. Moments later, Elena and Marco's car rolls in, followed closely by Derek on his motorcycle, each arriving from different directions, yet all drawn to this single, mysterious point. As they gather, a palpable sense of confusion and wariness hangs in the air. The diner, despite its disrepair, emits a strange allure, beckoning them to enter. The door creaks ominously as they push it open, stepping into a space that feels suspended in time. Inside, the air is thick with the aroma of old, stale coffee, and the decor is a jumble of decades past: a jukebox in the corner covered in dust, booths lined with cracked leather, and a long counter where an old cash register sits silent and dusty. This serendipitous convergence at the Last Stop Diner seems orchestrated by the desert itself, a junction point not just of roads, but of fates. Here, beneath the hum of flickering lights, their isolated experiences on the highway begin to weave together, revealing threads of a shared narrative that none had anticipated, but all are now part of. This place, it seems, is not just a refuge from the desert's eerie clutches, it is a pivotal chapter in the unfolding story of their nightmarish journey. Inside the dimly lit confines of the Last Stop Diner, the travelers, drawn together by forces they don't yet understand, find themselves sharing a worn, circular table. The air is heavy with the scent of old grease and dust, and as they exchange wary glances, a tentative conversation begins to unfold. Jim Keller, typically reserved, takes the lead, his voice low and steady, as he recounts the surreal visions and disembodied whispers that plagued his family on the road. As he speaks, Maria interjects with details of the eerie apparitions, her eyes wide with a vivid recall of fear. The children sit close, clutching each other, their expressions a mix of curiosity and dread. Chuck, leaning back in his chair, listens intently, his brow furrowed. When it's his turn, he shares the inexplicable changes in his cargo load, the shadows darting just out of sight, and the hauntingly familiar voice over the radio that dredged up long-buried conflicts with his brother. His normally gruff voice cracks slightly as he admits how these experiences shook his usually unflappable demeanor. Elena and Marco, hands clasped under the table, speak of the looping detour and the chilling photographic anomalies. Elena pulls out her camera, showing the other diners the unsettling images of spectral faces and her own multiple perspectives caught on film. Marco adds how the voices of their deceased loved ones seep through the car's speakers, a phenomenon both inexplicable and deeply disturbing. Finally, Derek shares his haunting experience of encountering versions of himself along the road, each more accusatory and unsettling than the last. His tale of self-confrontation and the physical marks it left on him brings a solemn nod from the others, an acknowledgement of the raw personal horrors each faced. As they piece together their stories, a chilling realization dawns on the group. Their experiences, though deeply personal, are intricately connected, not just by the shared route, but by a deeper, more sinister design. This acknowledgement binds them, a mutual recognition that whatever haunts the last stop diner and this stretch of desert highway has entwined their destinies in ways they might never fully understand. The conversation, once started, becomes a cathartic unraveling of the night's eerie tapestry, revealing how profoundly interconnected their lives have become under the shadow of the desert's dark influence. As the travelers delve deeper into their shared experiences within the time-worn walls of the last stop diner, the very nature of the place begins to reveal itself, harboring more than just the echoes of the past. Time, they start to realize, does not adhere to its usual rules here. The clock above the diner's door has stopped at midnight, its hands frozen, yet outside, the quality of light shifts from dusk to dawn in erratic cycles that obey no earthly rhythm. The more they discuss, the more the diner seems to respond to their fears. The jukebox springs to life sporadically, playing songs that eerily reflect their conversations about past regrets and lost loves, and then abruptly stops, as if to punctuate their deepest revelations. The windows show reflections not just of the diners, but of distorted nightmare versions of themselves experiencing their worst fears. Jim notices first that the stories they share seem to repeat, not just in content but in happening. Maria swears she has recounted the same incident to the group several times, each time feeling as though it was the first. Chuck's attempts to leave the diner to check on his truck are thwarted inexplicably, as each exit through the diner's front door leads him right back into the main dining hall, as though space itself folds back upon itself. The group tests this bizarre phenomenon, each taking turns to walk out, only to re-enter moments later through the same door, their expressions morphing from confusion to horror. It becomes evident that the diner, or whatever force inhabits it, is creating a loop, a relentless cycle of their narrated terrors that they are compelled to relive and confront continuously. This realization strikes them with chilling clarity. The diner is not just a stop on their journey but a trap, a temporal anomaly that has ensnared them in a repeating loop of their most harrowing moments. Here, in this forsaken outpost, their nightmares are not only remembered but are also relived, forcing each to face the manifestations of their deepest fears over and over again, with no apparent end in sight. In the moment of eerie revelation that ties their personal horrors to the place they inadvertently gathered, the group learns about the dark history of the highway they traveled and the diner that now holds them captive. As they probe deeper into the diner's mysteries, they find a collection of old newspaper clippings yellowed with age, pinned haphazardly to a corkboard hidden behind the counter. The articles detail a tragic event long forgotten by the world outside, but eternally memorialized by this stretch of road. Decades ago, the articles recount, a catastrophic accident occurred on the very stretch of highway where each traveler felt the first stirrings of unease. A bus carrying a group of revelers headed to a distant celebration veered off the road in a violent storm, crashing into the desolate landscape. Every passenger perished as the bus was engulfed in flames, the charred remains melding with the sand and scrub. This tragic incident, the article suggests, has left a permanent scar on the land, a curse that replays the horror of that night. The diner, once a thriving stopover for weary travelers, stood witness to the accident and since then, has been the epicenter of the highway's haunted legacy. It became an anchor for the restless energies released by the sudden and violent losses, energies that now manifest as the horrors the travelers face. The realization dawns on them all. They are caught in a replay of that fateful night, each experiencing echoes of the terror and panic that permeated the crash. Their own fears and nightmares are amplified by the cursed ground, intertwining with the residual despair that lingers on the highway. This loop, it seems, is not just a trap but a reenactment, destined to involve any who traverse this damned route, compelling them to relive the past's unresolved agony. This understanding marks a chilling turn in their ordeal, as they grasp the depth of the curse's influence and the daunting prospect of their escape. As the grim reality of their predicament settles in, the travelers at the last stop diner come to understand that escaping the sinister loop in which they are ensnared requires more than just physical departure. It demands confronting and overcoming the deep-seated fears that have been manipulated and magnified by the curse. Jim Keller faces his sense of inadequacy and fear of failure that haunt him both as a father and a husband. In a symbolic act within the looping nightmare, he must reassure and rally his family, showing true leadership and decisiveness, qualities he always feared he lacked. Maria Keller must overcome her fear of losing control, a terror that emerged starkly when confronted with the supernatural occurrences. She learns to let go of her need for order, embracing the unpredictability of their situation, finding strength in her ability to adapt and protect her children under the most bizarre circumstances. Chuck Reynolds grapples with his isolation and the unresolved issues with his brother. In a poignant moment, he confronts an apparition of his brother in the diner, engaging in a cathartic dialogue that he had been avoiding for years, addressing past grievances and expressing long-suppressed feelings of regret and forgiveness. Elena is forced to confront her fear of being forgotten, symbolized by the spectral images captured in her photographs. She resolves to make peace with her obscurity, understanding that her worth isn't measured by recognition, but by the authentic moments she captures and cherishes. Marco faces his fear of inadequacy as a writer, challenged by the critical voices that had driven him to near paralysis. He must write a sincere account of their eerie experiences, turning his ordeal into a narrative that finally satisfies him, proving that his voice is valid and impactful. Derek Sanders confronts the self-loathing and guilt from his past. Facing the versions of himself along the road, he learns to forgive himself, acknowledging his mistakes, but also recognizing his efforts to change and better himself. Each confrontation is deeply personal and emotionally charged, taking place in the surreal confines of the diner or on the distorted road outside. These acts of bravery and resolution are not just battles with externalized fears, but are introspective journeys that redefine their understanding of themselves. As they each face and conquer these internal demons, the eerie grip of the desert highway begins to weaken, suggesting that their release from the nightmarish loop might finally be within reach. United by their harrowing experiences and the personal demons they've confronted, the group decides it's time to leave the last stop diner and the haunting stretch of highway. A newfound bond, formed under the pressure of their shared ordeal, cements their resolve to escape together. They recognize that their individual attempts to flee were futile, but there might be strength and perhaps even salvation in unity. With dawn breaking over the desert, casting long shadows and painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, they gather their belongings. The air is charged with a tense anticipation as they approach the door of the diner for what they hope is the last time. They share determined glances, each person's resolve buoyed by the presence of the others. Stepping out into the fresh morning air, they find the landscape subtly altered. The road, once a linear path leading into uncertainty, now seems to promise a route out. They move as one, their steps synchronized, not just by the rhythm of walking, but by the deep emotional synchrony they've developed. Each person carries not only their own hopes for escape, but also a piece of each other's burdens and fears, which they've come to understand and share through their night of revelations. As they walk, the horizon that had once seemed so menacing now beckons with the light of a new day. Their collective stride is one of resilience, a testament to their shared experience and mutual support. The desert, observing their departure, no longer feels like a malevolent force, but merely another chapter in their life stories, one that they are on the verge of concluding together. As the early morning sun crests the horizon, its rays spilling gold across the desert sands, the group feels a surge of hope. The crisp morning air fills their lungs, and with every step away from the last stop diner, their spirits lift. The highway under their feet stretches onward, seemingly leading them towards freedom and away from the nightmarish loop they endured. However, as they continue, an unsettling familiarity begins to creep into their surroundings. The road, which had seemed to promise a new beginning, subtly curves in ways that defy their sense of direction. Conversations falter as a collective unease grows, the landscape around them subtly shifts, the once welcoming dawn now casting shadows that twist and elongate in unnerving patterns. The turning point comes when they crest a small rise in the road, expecting to see the expansive open desert stretch out before them. Instead, their hearts sink as they come face to face with an impossible sight: the last stop diner, looming ominously in the distance, its neon sign flickering as if it had never been turned off. The realization hits them with the weight of the desert's endless sands. The highway, their hoped-for avenue of escape, has betrayed them, curving back on itself in a cruel loop that has deposited them right back where they started. Disbelief and frustration wash over the group as they stand, momentarily defeated, gazing at the diner that had become their prison. The diner stands silent, almost mocking in its stillness, a stark reminder that the desert and its mysteries are not so easily left behind. The dawn, once a symbol of hope, now casts an eerie glow over the scene, highlighting the surreal and cyclical nature of their plight. After their disheartening return to the last stop diner, the group reluctantly re-enters the eerily familiar establishment. The interior greets them with its unchanged, time-worn ambience. As they gather, bewildered and weary, the sound of a clearing throat catches their attention. From the shadows behind the counter, an old man emerges, his face etched with lines that tell of decades spent under the harsh desert sun. His eyes, though aged, flicker with an unnerving sharpness. He introduces himself as Howard, the diner's owner, and with a voice as rough as the gravel outside, he begins to unravel the history of the curse that binds them to this place. Howard explains that the diner was built on the site of an ancient and powerful convergence of ley lines, natural pathways that carry the Earth's energies. Decades ago, the catastrophic accident that claimed so many lives unleashed a torrent of psychic distress that disrupted these energies, creating a temporal vortex at the diner. The old man reveals that the spirits of those lost in the accident are trapped in a perpetual loop of their final moments, their anguish feeding the curse. The diner, acting as an anchor, draws in those who carry heavy emotional burdens, ensnaring them in the same endless cycle, in an attempt to balance the disrupted energies. Howard looks each of them in the eye as he discloses their role in the saga. They were not merely unfortunate souls who stumbled upon the diner, they were drawn here because each carries a resonance with the tragic energies of the place. To break the cycle, they must not only confront and resolve their own deepest fears, but also help release the trapped energies of the past by acknowledging and sharing the grief of those lost spirits. As he concludes his explanation, the air around them seems to pulse with a new intensity, as if the diner itself is urging them to find the strength to end the cycle. As the group absorbs Howard's revelations, the weight of their situation settles around them like the desert dust outside. They realize that their arrival at the diner was no accident, but a preordained moment dictated by the powerful forces at play within the landscape's ancient energies. Each of them, by virtue of their own life's burdens and traumas, was drawn into the desert's unresolved narrative, a story that has been repeating itself long before they entered its domain. In a quiet, resigned acceptance, they listen to the wind howling softly outside, a sound that now seems like the mournful wail of the desert itself. As they glance around the diner, the surroundings take on a more spectral quality, the edges of reality blurring as the diner prepares to reset its trap. The story concludes with the group sitting together at the diner, not with the desperation of initial fear, but with a somber camaraderie. They understand now that they are not just trapped physically by the boundaries of the road or the diner, they are woven into the fabric of this cursed place, their fate stitched into its endless loop of sorrow and repetition. The desert, indifferent to their realization, continues to spin its tales of woe and entrapment. The final scene fades with the sun setting once again, casting long shadows across the diner. The neon sign flickers to life, casting an eerie glow that reads "Last Stop Diner," as if beckoning new travelers. Inside, the group prepares to relive their journey, now a permanent part of the desert's haunting narrative, their stories destined to repeat in the echo of the diner's timeless loop. The implication is clear. Escape was never an option, they are now indelibly part of the desert's eerie and perpetual story. As the narrative of Desert of the Damned draws to its haunting close, the camera slowly pans away from the subdued group inside the diner, transitioning through the dusty diner window to the outside world. The sun is just beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with fiery hues of orange and red, casting long, ominous shadows across the desolate landscape. The scene shifts to a new angle, revealing the quiet hum of an approaching vehicle. A family car, filled with laughter and the sounds of a lively conversation, heads towards the same stretch of highway that has seen countless similar travelers. Inside, a family unaware of the diner's dark history is planning their route, their voices filled with excitement about the journey ahead. As their car rolls forward, the tires kicking up clouds of dust, another vehicle, a lone motorcycle driven by a solitary rider, appears in the frame, following the same path. The motorcyclist, a young woman with a look of determined independence, is unknowingly riding towards the same fate. These scenes serve to emphasize the cyclical nature of the curse that binds the desert highway and the diner. The newcomers, each absorbed in their own worlds, are oblivious to the eerie forces that lie in wait. The shot lingers on the highway, stretching out before them, a silent, unending loop that promises to ensnare all who traverse its path. The camera then pulls back to a wider shot, encapsulating the vast, unyielding expanse of the desert, the road a thin line cutting through it. The last light of the day fades, and the diner's neon sign flickers into life once more, its glow a beacon in the gathering dusk.